All right, good morning. We'll get started. We're going to go to page 180, go through some material we touched on last week. So page 180, it's 106a, Baba Metzia. 180 verse 8. And the discussion is, what if it's a bad year for the sharecropper? Can he deduct whatever he lost in the bad year for various reasons from his rent or percentage, whatever he's paying to the landowner? Nishtadfu kolstotav shel machkir. Okay, so all the fields of the landowner were blasted. Blasted means they were ruined by all sorts of possibilities, bad weather, insects, whatever it might be. And so these fields could be all over. They wouldn't necessarily be in the same valley or in the same county. This guy owns lots of fields, and every single one of them was hurt by something, damaged by something. So there's very poor harvest in every one of this guy's fields. V'ishtaduf nami ha behadahu. And also, we're talking about one particular field, also all the fields around it. Now, if you remember our definition of makat medina, so makat medina means some regional disaster. We actually have two working definitions. One is if the majority of the fields in that valley were afflicted, then it becomes a regional disaster, in which case the sharecropper can deduct from the rent. So that's one definition, is the majority of the fields around. Another definition, another way of looking at it, is all the adjacent fields are affected. Okay? So in this case, this particular landowner, all of his fields, all over the place. He had them all over the country. They were all affected, and also all of the fields around him. So it would, in fact, fulfill one of the definitions of makat medina, which is a regional disaster, because one of those definitions is all of the adjacent fields. However, the oddity here is that every one of this guy's fields, in the north, in the south, east, west, every single one of his fields was affected. Okay. But velo ishtaduf ruva devaga. So the one thing that's not affected was the majority of the valley. Okay, so all the adjacent fields were affected, in which case you could say it was a makat medina. On the other hand, you don't have the majority of the fields in the valley. All right, so you might say, so the question is, question of course always is, can the sharecropper deduct? And the first answer is going to be yes and no. Yes, because only one of the two definitions of makat medina, of a regional disaster, will fulfill. Okay, and you have this oddity of every single one of this landowner's fields, no matter where they are, were affected. That's the case. Do we understand the case? Mm-hmm. Okay. So miyam rinan. So could we say, kevan de lo ishtaduf ruva devaga lo manakela? You could say simply, because not the majority of the fields were not afflicted. Therefore, according to that definition, it's not a makat medina, not a regional disaster. So he can't deduct. O dielma, or perhaps kevan de ishtaduf kulu arate, because all of this guy's fields, no matter where they were affected. Matzi amarle, the sharecropper can say to him, Hi, mishum latach didachu. This whole thing is because of your misfortune, your bad luck. And the translation of luck here isn't a good translation. You'll see as we go deeper into it, it's more than bad luck. It's somehow a punishment from God. Somebody up there doesn't like you. That's what the sharecropper is saying.
It's your doing.
It's your doing, but it's someone's giving you a message. Right. He's not implying, by the way, that this guy's been negligent in his fields. He's saying there's something about you that the angels of agriculture don't like. So it has nothing to do with me. So therefore I should be able to deduct. Okay? That's his argument. Because look, it can't be a coincidence that every single one of your fields, north, south, east, west, no matter where they are, were affected. It must be something about you. And there's just a hint in here. It's not fully stated. A hint that you're being punished. And if you're being punished, why should I suffer? So I should be able to deduct it because it has nothing to do with me. Okay? Anyway. Because all of your fields are affected. Page 181. So those are the two possibilities. The two possibilities are, one, he can deduct, and one, he can't. Okay? So and the reason why he can't deduct might just be because it wasn't the majority of the fields in the area, so therefore that's the law. Mistabra. Okay, so then now the Talmud says mistabra means using our faculty of reason, we can figure this out. Now keep in mind their definition of reason might be different than your definition of reason. People reason differently sometimes, but they're appealing to reason. When you see the word mistabra, it's the logical answer is mistabra demarle. So the answer is that the landlord could say, imishum latai didi, if it was because of my bad luck, which is what you're claiming, hava mishtayer li porta, something would remain, because, and now a verse, kidichtiv, kinish arnu ma'at meharbe. And then here there's a verse. The verse says, when God is punishing you with a streak of bad fortune, God doesn't punish you all the way. Something is still left. And in this case, all of my fields were affected. And because God didn't even leave one field, we know that it's not actually God manipulating things to my misfortune. It's just plain misfortune. It's random bad luck. And if it's random bad luck, then you don't get to deduct. We go back to the original definition of a makat medina, a regional disaster, which is that the majority of the fields were affected. Mm-hmm. So therefore you can't deduct. No, the majority of the fields were not affected. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you can't deduct. Okay. And here you're sort of closing in on a definition of bad luck. So bad luck caused by God. That's why it's a bad translation. Let's say an act from heaven. You can define it. You can recognize it if everything is affected except one little thing. That one little thing is God's signature. It means it's me that's doing it. You need to know it's me that's doing it, and it's not just bad luck. Okay? All right. That's where we stopped last time. Any questions? Okay.
Is this the original act of God?
Yeah. Nishtadfu kostotav shechocher. Okay. Now they switch the question. In this case, all the fields of the sharecropper were affected. So sharecroppers, a sharecropper can be like a business where you lease a bunch of fields all over the country. And in this case, and they're not adjacent. They're all over the place. Right? They're north, south, east, west. And in this case, all of the sharecroppers' fields were afflicted. Okay? And ve'ishtaduf ruba devaga. And also, you have the majority of the valley in one particular field that we're going to talk about. The majority in that valley were afflicted. The ishtaduf nami ha behadayu, and also in this one field that we're talking about, all the ones around it were afflicted. So in other words, in this case, it follows makat medina. It does, right? So it's you can define it as a regional disaster. The only thing that's odd about this case is this particular sharecropper. All of his fields, north, south, east, west, all over the country, were also affected, in addition to this one. Okay? So what would the law be? So there's going to be two possibilities. I'll keep going. Mi amrina, do we say, kevan deishtaduf ruva devaga? Do we say, because the majority of the fields in the valley were afflicted, meaning it is a regional disaster, minakele, he is allowed to deduct from his rent? O dilma, or is it, kevan deishtaduf kulhe arate, all of the fields that he is leasing? It's not that he owns them, but all the fields that he's leasing are affected. Matze amarle, the landowner can say, mishum latach didachu. The landowner can say, no, this is because of your bad luck. Yeah. Not bad luck. This is because the angels of agriculture are frowning on you. And why should I have to suffer? You still have to pay me, because this is not about the region here. This is about you. And someone giving you a message. If someone's giving you a message, you should have to pay, not me. Okay? Because look, all of your fields were affected. Mistabra. Okay, so now we have again an appeal to logic. The Talmud answers, Mistabra de amarle mishum delatachu. So now they're saying, they actually give a different answer. They're saying, no, the logical answer is that the landowner is allowed to say, this is your agricultural angels giving you a message. That's what it's about. So therefore, you're not allowed to deduct. That's interesting because it goes against the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, the Mishnah defines makat medina as the majority of the fields in that area. And what the Gemara here is saying, that despite the fact that it does follow the majority of the fields, because this particular leaseor, this particular sharecroppers, had all of his fields affected all over the place, that's enough to tell us that it's actually about a punishment, a judgment from God. So therefore, he shouldn't be able to pass along that judgment to God, to the landowner. And that's how the Gemara is ruling. Okay? Now that's a problematic ruling because it goes for two reasons. One, it goes against the Mishnah. Also, it goes against just the above ruling where you say you don't take that into consideration. Okay? So the Gemara immediately, the other rabbis immediately object. Amai. Why would that be? Hachi nami ne'maleh. So why would that be? We should be able to say in this case also, imi shum latai didihu, if it's because of my angels of misfortunes frowning on me, have mishayer li porta. They would have left me one little field as a signature. Remember, that's how we know it's God's judgment, because there'd be one field. But in this case, every one of his fields was afflicted. And in that case, it would follow the verse. Remember, the verse is the one that tells us that we know it's God's punishment if one thing is left. So in this case, nothing was left. Every single field was afflicted. So why are you saying this is because of God's punishment on me? Nothing was left. Okay? And now the answer is Mishum Damarle, I have chazit de ishtayure lach midei. Okay. So what if you're going to claim that one thing should be left for you? Okay, turn the page. This is the landowner now talking back to the lessee. Have mishtayer lach medenavshach. Something would be left of yours that belongs to you. So the difference is, remember here, when you're a sharecropper and you're leasing the land, you in fact don't own any of those properties. You are just leasing the properties. You're renting the properties. So if every one of those fields is afflicted, they're actually not your property. So if something was left of you for you, now, all of the fields that you are leasing were affected, and something was left for you, your clothes, your equipment. Don't expect God to spare one of those fields, because remember, the fields don't belong to you in the first place. So when it says something that something of yours will be spared, it's not going to be the fields. It's going to be something that you actually own. So something that you own was spared. God didn't take your fields, your clothes, your equipment, your children. By the way, this is all a reference to Job, where nothing was left for Job. So okay. Anyway, but still, all right. So that's we're done with that case. Any comments, questions? Okay. So you end up in that case, he's not allowed to deduct. Okay. All these, by the way, are very unusual circumstances. It would be unusual first of all, it'd be unusual for a sharecropper to own to be leasing many fields. Could happen. And the fact that they would all be afflicted would be unusual. But maybe they had these cases. The Talmud brings it up here because, the cases probably did come before them, or they're just playing around intellectually and trying to figure out what the law would be, hypothetically.
Well, you could have a situation where the sharecropper actually owns a couple fields, but he's leasing these out, so to speak.
Right. Luckily, they don't bring that up at all. Right. That would really complicate things if you're both a sharecropper and a landowner at the same time. Yeah.
He could be a lousy farmer wherever he touches, he messes up.
Yeah, what's interesting is they don't bring up that possibility. Like, this is just about you. The reason they don't bring up that possibility is because in that particular field that they're arguing about, it does follow the definition of a regional disaster. So he is allowed to say, it's not because of my incompetence. This was a regional disaster. Look, every single field in the area was afflicted. And the reason then that becomes a poor argument is then the landowner says back to him, it's not about a regional disaster. Every single one of your fields was afflicted. This has to have something to do with you, and that's why they're fighting it out.
Even if it is a regional disaster, if you lease something, you lease it. It's your bad luck. It's the weather's bad, isn't it?
That's not the law. No, the law is that the owner and the sharecropper share in the risk. They share in the risk, and so you are allowed to deduct. If that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah is that if it's a really bad year, you are allowed to deduct from your rent.
Just a couple of points. Let's say there were 6 fields. It'd be about 1 in 64 chance that all of those fields would fail.
Right.
And so something else.
Is affected. Something else is affected.
If I were in that community, and this guy goes bankrupt because all of the fields that he was renting
Yeah.
failed,
Yeah, you wouldn't lease
I
it.
would be
Right, yeah.
disinclined to rent
Yeah.
anything from that
Yeah.
owner
Yeah.
because there's a bad history there.
Oh, but no, but you could say also for the lessee, for the sharecropper too. If the sharecropper has a very poor record of farming, you're not going to lease to that guy. And if you do,
Well, he's
if you do, then you take responsibility for it. Right, that's your risk too. So I mean, this is a business arrangement where both are risking something and both stand to gain something too. So the Mishnah actually underscores that in fact, when you are leasing your field to a sharecropper, you better find somebody whose skills that you trust, because he's allowed to deduct if things go wrong. Okay. But of course, if he's a good farmer, you benefit. Remember, it's 50-50. So that's a very high percentage. So the landowner has a good deal here. He's getting 50% and he's doing nothing. So the fact that the sharecropper is allowed to deduct in a bad year is really not that harmful to the sharecropper, because the landowner still has a very good deal. Okay. Matve. So matve means objection, and it's an objection to the Mishnah, not to the cases we had before, and it brings up something interesting. It has to do with the definition of a regional disaster, makat medina, and how you define that. Okay? Haitash not shidafon. There was a shidafon is a bad weather, a blast. V'yerakon, or this is disease, like a mold kind of disease. Oshvi'it, or it's a sabbatical year. Oshayu shanim kishnei Eliyahu. Or if there were some years like the years of Elijah, that's referring to drought. Okay, so there was when Elijah was a prophet, this is when there was a multi-year drought where there were zero crops. It was a total drought. There were zero crops. If you remember the story, so Elijah finally prays for rain. He has this competition with the Baal, right? So the Canaanite Baal priests, who's going to bring rain? And Elijah wins and they lose, and that's the rain. That's the end of the drought. But up until that point, there'd been a total and full drought. So let me just finish. So these are the three cases. Those are the three cases. There's a case of a shidafon, which is bad weather, like a wind blast, yerakon, a disease, or drought. Eno olelo min aminyan. That doesn't count in the counting. I'll tell you what the counting is, and we take questions. So the counting is, and it's a very interesting, in some ways inspiring, but unusual arrangement. It's in the Torah. It's in the Bible. It's the Jubilee year. Yeah. So the Jubilee year is what happens in the Jubilee year? The 50th year, every field goes back to its original owner. Okay. So let's say if you're a landowner and you sell your field. Let's say you sell your field the first year of the Jubilee year. So when you sell the field to somebody, remember that he's going to get it back. You're going to get it back. So it's not a permanent sale. You might even call that, in our language, we might call it a lease, because you're going to get back long-term lease, and that's going to factor into the price. The price is going to because you're not selling the field in perpetuity. You're going to get the field back. Okay, so that's one thing to keep in mind. When you sell your field, you're selling it with the knowledge you're going to get it back, and that's going to affect the price. So when you buy that field, you're going to try to figure, okay, so how much am I going to make in the 50 years? Right. And that's going to be roughly the price, and you negotiate, it's going to be roughly the price. But there's something else you need to know, which is that the original owner has the right to buy back the field at any time after 2 years. Now, the Torah says that the Torah just uses the plural of years to say after years you have the right to redeem that field. Redeem the field means to buy it back so that you get it back. You're the original owner. So at any time you have the right to buy it back. Now, when I say the right to buy it back, obviously you have to pay. You have to pay for it, but you do have that right, and then you negotiate a price. Okay, and the person who's leasing it or who's buying it, if you find a fair price, can't deny you that right to get the field back. And there's a lot of things, interesting philosophical things going on here. The Torah prefers that land stay with its original owner. The Torah understands, the Torah understands that there may be a time where you have to sell because you're in trouble and you need the cash. Okay, but the Torah then wants to make it easier for you to reclaim your field. After 50 years, you get it back for sure, but you might want to reclaim it even earlier than that, and the Torah is actually giving you an incentive to reclaim it. Okay, all that's behind this. Okay, yeah.
At what point are you considered an original owner? How does original?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when the people, I mean, it goes back to when the people cross the Jordan and they take possession of the land was divided equally among all the families, among all the people at that time. And that's your land. That's the original owner. And you could see, I mean, it's a very interesting, in some ways very beautiful, but utterly unrealistic system where the Torah wants every family to have their land, their plot of land in Israel, and things are going to change, but every 50 years it's going to go back to its original home. So you're never away from home for very long. And they even apply that to homes. Eventually homes go back to the original owner. Okay. All right. So what this is talking about, so just to understand, this is saying that after 2 years, so they define, remember the Torah only has the plural years. So what's the minimum that would be? It's 2. After 2 years, the original owner is allowed to repurchase the land at a fair price, okay? Unless the land yielded nothing in the first year. So the land yielding nothing, they give 3 possibilities for the land yielding nothing. One is a wind blast that is so destructive that you got nothing during that harvest, or a disease, actually it's 4, a disease where you got nothing, it yielded nothing, or, I'm sorry, maybe it's only 3. Oh no, or a drought, an absolute total drought where it yielded nothing, or the sabbatical year. Because in the sabbatical year, you're not allowed to farm, so it yielded nothing. So if it was one of those years, that doesn't count towards the years where you're allowed to redeem the land. Okay, that's all this Mishnah is saying. And you're going to see they quote this Mishnah as an objection to our original definition of a regional disaster. Okay, so any questions up to now? Yes.
You mentioned that the right has to go back to the original owner to buy that property in 2 or 3, whatever number of years. Right. And the lessor, or at that point, the second buyer says, okay, fine, but I want X amount of money. And they can't come to a price.
So they're required to come to a price. There's a formula. If we read on, there's a kind of formula. There's a formula. It has to do how much the field would yield in an average year. That's what it has. So now it all depends on if it's year 35, which means that the field's going to go back in 15 years. Then he's going to pay less, right? Yeah, he's going to pay less. If it's year 2,
depreciating asset.
Yeah, it's a depreciating asset. So they come up with a formula, and ultimately, if you follow the formula, the person who is leasing the field, I'll use the word leasing, but it's not the original owner, eventually has to sell it back to the original owner. Okay, but you have to give the person that's buying that field at least 2 years to use the field. But if one of those years is a total wash, is totally unproductive, it doesn't count. That's in a few lines. That's the principle it's getting across. Yeah.
Yes, this is about the original owner.
Yeah.
50 years is considered 2 generations. So basically, the father, the grandkids would be there. So you probably would have like a legal battle as to who the grandkids are getting that.
Well, it's a complicated system, and it's hard to. I don't know that there's a record of this ever being carried out. I mean, it's
the first one in each of them. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is the grandson, sons, and the first one is the grandson.
Mike.
So, I see a possible asymmetry here. If the person who is doing the farming has to pay because all the fields didn't produce, while in general there were other fields were producing, or more than 50% of other fields were producing, if he has to pay, what if he has all the fields he's doing or controlling yield while there's a general loss?
Okay. So you're going back to the other.
He doesn't get to not pay.
Right.
And so there's an asymmetry.
Yeah, there is an asymmetry. It's true. Yeah. Now they don't bring up that case. That would be a very unusual case. But yeah, I mean, if everybody around you is doing really poorly, you're doing well.
Yeah.
Well, see, he pays the percentage. Remember, it's a percentage, so he pays the percentage. And yes, he doesn't get to deduct. Yeah.
So there's definitely an asymmetry here.
Yeah.
In favor of the landowner.
Yeah. But it also gives the landowner an incentive to find a good farmer. I want a good farmer, so right. And what the good farmer gets is the benefit of being a good farmer. I mean, he still benefits. He still gets the. Yeah. Okay. I mean, the owner owns the field, so the owner of the field owns the field, so he gets the he has the stronger hand. It's true. Okay.
Just to inject a bit of history.
I mean, an owner could say back to you, yes, but I'm taking all sorts of risk. I may get nothing.
Right.
You know, if I may get nothing from this field because he's going to deduct it, right? Yeah.
Rabbi, just to inject a bit of history, the Talmud is written, let's say, 500 AD.
Yeah.
But in the time of the temples,
yeah,
they had already drifted away from all of this original stuff of assigning the land.
Seems like they had. Yeah, it's hard to know exactly how much, but you know, they're still keeping it sort of alive in the law.
It's
you know.
aspirational.
That's
I
what?
think it's aspirational.
Aspirational. Yeah. A lot of the law code is imagining a time when we can actually fulfill this stuff.
Right.
And so you know, that's kind of the work of Neusner. Neusner's a Talmud scholar. You know, who says that a lot of what they're doing in the Talmud is trying to imagine a time when we're all back in Israel and the temple standing, and we're not going to stop analyzing the law just because we haven't reached the point where we're back in Israel and the temple. We're still going to analyze the law, preparing for the day when we be back there. Now, and in Babylon, I mean, this is the Babylonian Talmud, so
right,
they're still.
They're not going to apply these rules in that society.
But they're going to talk about them. You're right. They're not going to apply them. You'll see it comes to that just in a second. Well, actually, probably be in several weeks because we won't get to it. But remember, so the sabbatical year, even in the time of the Torah, the sabbatical year doesn't apply to land outside of Israel. And these rabbis are living outside of Israel. So so when they talk about it, they're talking about it in theory anyway, because they don't live in Israel. Let me just finish this, and then we can take a few more questions. Just because I want to really articulate what their question is. Okay. Katani shida fon v'yerakon dumia dishanim kishnei Eliyahu. So the bad weather, the wind blast, and the disease, the mold, is the same thing as the years of Elijah. Mashnei Eliyahu delo havetua klal. Just as during the time of Elijah, there was no harvest at all, no produce at all. Af hachi nama delo havetua klal. Here also, for the weather conditions and also for the mold, the disease, it must be, since they're comparing those things, a time when there's no produce at all. Aval de'ikatvua sakale, if there was a single bit of harvest during that time, in that case it would count as one of those years. Velo ka'amrinan makat medinahu, and you wouldn't call it a regional disaster. So understand this. So in this Mishnah, a regional disaster means total, no produce at all. In what we've been studying up to now, the assumption isn't a total disaster. The assumption is just some bad stuff, a bad year. A bad year doesn't mean a total wipeout. It just means a bad year. So now they're actually just kind of probing the definition of a regional disaster. Does a regional disaster mean zero, zilch, you got nothing? Or does it mean a bad year? If it's just a bad year, remember that becomes subjective. Right. So now they're suggesting that the landowner, the lessee, the sharecropper can only deduct from his rent if it's a makat medina, a regional disaster that leads to nothing, no produce at all. And then you might say, well, of course, because he's got nothing to give. But if that's it, so if the definition of a regional disaster is no produce whatsoever, that would change everything we've talked about up to now. Because up to now, we haven't talked about total, complete disaster. We've talked about a bad year. Okay, that's the objection here, which we will have time probably next time to unpack. Okay.